It's taken me 20 years to realize why Link's power is courage. Can you blame me? I mean, it's difficult to feel courage in a game where death isn't permanent. On top of this, Zelda's wisdom has also been perplexing to me. If she's so wise, then how does she always end up getting outsmarted and trapped by Ganondorf? Speaking of the devil, Ganon's power is actually the easiest to understand, as the Triforce of Power is simply a strength multiplier. To be honest, these questions have been bothering me a lot recently. I mean, how can I call Zelda my favorite series if there are such drastic contradictions in the story? So in this video, I'm gonna deep dive into each part of the Triforce and figure out once and for all why Nintendo chose power, wisdom, and courage as the attributes of the Triforce. I'm also gonna analyze how beautifully Nintendo pulls off demonstrating these powers in their main characters. We'll start with wisdom, but first, make sure to subscribe. Let's see if we can get to 2,000 subscribers by March. Wisdom is the ability to discern the truth, especially when clouded in darkness. It's not to be confused with intelligence, otherwise Link would be better off interacting with the scientists of the series rather than with characters like Impa. Wisdom isn't knowledge that can be learned through, say, a lesson at school, but rather it's knowledge gained through experience. In fact, it's a quality deeply tied to the passage of time. And who could better embody such a quality than Zelda, daughter of the everlasting royal family and who bears the ancient spirit of Hylia. Zelda's spirit has lived through countless incarnations, giving a character who would otherwise be perceived as naive a deep understanding of her world and the tools that may be leveraged to save it. So this is why Zelda is primed to be the bearer of the Triforce of Wisdom, but what's more interesting to me is how exactly Nintendo demonstrates her wisdom throughout the games. Zelda manifests wisdom in the form of being a guiding light for Link. When our hero is lost, and when all else is in shambles, Zelda is the beacon of light who we take a leap of faith towards, and who always provides us direction amidst the chaos. In Twilight Princess, when Midna is on the border of life and death, and when Link is stuck in his beastly form, who do we go to? Zelda. In Ocarina of Time, who is it that first orients us after we've awoken out of a 7-year slumber? That's right, Zelda. Even in Majora's Mask, who do we go to, or better yet, who comes to us when we have nothing but an ocarina to save the world? You guessed it, Zelda. This depiction of wisdom isn't new. There are so many classic myths across history and across cultures that recount the story of a hero seeking wisdom during dark times. In Norse mythology, Odin seeks out the god of wisdom, Mimir, to guide him through the world-ending events of Ragnarok. In Greek mythology, Hercules accidentally unalives his whole family, leaving him in shambles. Confused and lacking direction, he consults the Oracle of Delphi in hopes that she'll provide guidance. I'm sure you see the pattern across these stories. Notice the strategic timing of when the wise characters appear. Whether it's Zelda, Mimir, or the Oracle of Delphi, the wise character is called upon when the hero lacks direction, and acts as a guiding force for the hero's redemption. There's one more question I asked in the beginning that I'd like to circle back to. Why Ganondorf is able to trick Zelda a few times throughout the series? Well, the reason is that Ganondorf, like all of the characters, has some combination of all three attributes of the Triforce, even though he specializes in one. It's the same reason Link can overpower Ganondorf, or Zelda can step up in front of Link. So to summarize this section, evidence of Zelda's wisdom may not be as easy to spot as, say, Ganondorf consuming an item and getting 10x strength, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. No, that just means that we as Zelda fans have to take a closer look of the timing of Zelda's appearances in future entries of the series to really see her shine. Power is the most delicate part of the Triforce. It lets the wielder dictate the order of things, but when corrupted, power becomes a negative force. When used appropriately, power is supposed to be corrective. It's used to make sure that when something, or someone, steps out of line, they're put back into line. Just like with wisdom, we see corrective power throughout tons of stories across history. The first one that comes to mind for me is the story of Noah's Ark. In that story, God uses an arguably harsh demonstration of power to flood the earth, cleansing it of evil. If that sounds familiar, that's because the same exact thing happens in The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, when the gods flood Hyrule to, well, cleanse it of evil. Unlike in these stories, however, more often than not, we see the Triforce of Power corrupted by Ganondorf's obsession for power. Throughout the series, we see tons of examples of Ganondorf's obsession. One of the more recent examples I've noticed occurs in the 2023 installment of the series, Tears of the Kingdom. In this game, there's a scene where Ganondorf shares with Link his vision of a perfect and glorious Hyrule Castle. When I first experienced the scene, I didn't think much of it, but then one day the symbolism in the scene hit me really hard, and it's actually the reason I even started to deeply analyze the Triforce in the first place. The scene is actually about Ganondorf using his magic to spread false promises and a utopian vision. It's a real-life playbook that many power-hungry figures in history have followed, most notably the totalitarian dictators of the 20th century. These rulers couldn't share their visions through magic, but clearly propaganda worked just as well. After noticing this, I started to more clearly notice Ganon's tactics across the whole series. In Ocarina of Time, a really striking detail to me is that Ganondorf installs Ingo as an agent to control Lon Lon Ranch. Similarly, he installs bosses into temples to act as agents over the various domains of Hyrule. This, again, is a textbook totalitarian play, and looks an awful lot like the secret police Stalin used throughout the Soviet Union. Switching games to Twilight Princess, we still see Ganondorf up to corruption, handing out false promises of power to other lost spirits so that he can get them to do his dirty work. Back to the Triforce. In my analysis, Nintendo seems to have chosen power precisely because of its ability to be corrupted by cunning characters like Ganondorf, and they've done incredibly well in demonstrating how power is corrupted, likely having been inspired by some of the most evil power-hungry people throughout history. I've spent a lot of time thinking about courage, and why out of all powers Nintendo could have given Link, they chose to give him courage. For the longest time, I chalked up Nintendo's decision to give Link the Triforce of Courage as a way to make Link the underdog, and I suspect that many of you watching this video have either concluded or just assumed the same. But honestly, I never liked that answer, and so I avoided thinking much about the topic because it troubled me to think that my favorite game series didn't have much depth to its main character. But after deciding to really tackle this question, I think I found the real answer as to why Link has the powers he has, and it turns out it's actually one of the sharpest attributes Nintendo could have given Link. For my first attempt to get an answer as to why Nintendo chose courage, I took a deeper look at examples of Link's actions throughout the games. To me, Link's courage stands out the most in Skyward Sword. In this game, when Link's about to enter a temple, you can very clearly see that he swallows his fear as he enters the depths. I never noticed this before, but it's really telling, and it makes me wonder about other examples of courage that just slip by me. But although Nintendo sprinkles these little bits of courage throughout the games, it's still hard to really grasp the amount of courage it takes to do something like enter a monster-infested dungeon when death in the game has no real consequence. And so looking through examples of Link's courage didn't actually give me a satisfying answer, so I put that to the side and kept looking elsewhere, only to find the answer after analyzing Ganondorf. Remember all the talk of Ganondorf representing corruption of power? Yeah, well, you know what's pretty good at stopping all of that? Courage. Nintendo didn't just choose courage to make Link an underdog. No, they chose it because historically speaking, courage has always been the antidote to corruption of power. There are countless examples throughout history of corrupt regimes and actors of courage who catalyzed the demise of those regimes. In the case of apartheid in South Africa, you had Nelson Mandela, who was ready to die fighting, and in the Soviet Union you had great minds like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who were put in labor camps just for speaking out against Stalin. It's worth noting that even in the smaller struggles of life, there's often a tyrant involved, whether that be a bully at school or an overbearing parent. Even in these everyday struggles, it's courage that we need to stand up to abuse of power. This is why Nintendo chose courage for Link, because courage is the most precise possible answer to the tyranny posed by Ganondorf. The dance between chaos and order is perhaps the most well-documented theme of humanity. It takes various forms across cultures and schools of thought, but in all cases the story is about the tendency of the world to fall into disarray unless it's upkept by humanity. The story of The Legend of Zelda is no different. Hyrule, just like in our world, has a tendency toward chaos, and that chaos manifests in the form of Null. Null is an ever-present being at the start of history whose existence is just to keep the world as a disintegrated, chaotic soup. As we learn in Echoes of Wisdom, it took the Golden Goddesses to keep Null at bay. When the powers of the Golden Goddesses come together, the Triforce appears. As we all know, the Triforce has the ability to grant a wish. At first, this may seem like a plot device that exists just to give Ganondorf motivation to obtain the Triforce, but there's also a lot more symbolism on top of that. The ability to grant a wish, in my analysis, is one of the clearest metaphors a story can use to capture the idea that something, in this case the Triforce, is a constructive/anti-chaotic energy. In other words, the Triforce represents order, while null represents chaos. And what better way is there to depict that than three shapes surrounding an empty space, effectively making the Triforce another version of the yin-yang symbol. So now that we have a deeper understanding of the characters, let's get to the fun part and answer the question of which part of the Triforce I'd pick if I had to. Before thinking through all of this deeply, I would have chosen Power, simply because it seemed like the most useful attribute to have. But after taking this deeper look at not only the symbolism in the game, but at real-world history and mythology itself, I can confidently say that I prefer Courage over both of the other powers. Courage is the answer to corruption. Courage is what those before you needed when they gave up their entire lives to make your life better. Courage is what you need when you confront a bully at school. Courage is what sets you free from the tyrant, whoever or whatever that may be. If you want to see more content, check out my video about why Ocarina of Time speedruns look so weird.